The New Babylon, Chapter 20. At daybreak, Will Jr. and Lindsay stopped to rest and find a suitable place to camp for the day. Will Jr. unfolded his map and made some calculations. "We should be less than 20 miles from Arby's cabin," he announced. "This should be a safe place to rest for the day," he said to his sister as he unpacked her emergency blanket. She rolled up her hoodie and placed it on the ground for a pillow. "Can we call Aunt Ellie?" she asked eagerly. "No," Will Jr. replied. "Not until we get ready to move out tonight." Dad always made a point of emphasizing the need to move directly after transmitting. "If someone has fixed our position, it will be important that we move out immediately." He sighed. Lindsay protested. "Darn it, Will! You're such a stickler for every little detail. Everything has to be so regimented. You're just like..." Then her voice trailed off, and she stared quietly out over the valley below. Will looked up at her. "Just like Dad," he finished her thought. She began to weep. He put his arm around her and was surprised at her response. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She rested her head upon his shoulder, and just like the opening of a floodgate, the tears began to pour out. Will put his arm around his sister and held her tightly. She began to wail hysterically. Let it out," he said. The two of them sat there together as Lindsay poured her soul out in her brother's arms. When she finally stopped, without saying a word, Will Jr. eased her head down onto her hoodie and placed her blanket over her, covering her up. He leaned over to kiss her on the cheek. Within seconds, she was sound asleep. Will Jr. turned on his handheld ham radio and switched it to MERS 4. He picked up his binoculars and scanned the valley below and the hill and the ridgeline beyond, carefully and completely. He saw no sign of anyone, and the radio remained silent. He looked at a town nestled in the valley below. He recognized it as the closest town to Arby's cabin. He and his dad came through it whenever they visited Arby. They would stop at a small diner on the main strip that ran through the town for breakfast every time they left to make the trip back home. Will Jr., his dad, Bryce, Bart, and Kevin would enjoy breakfast together before saying their goodbyes and each heading out in their respective directions home. Will had designated it to be the first rally point in an emergency contingency plan. The whole team was made aware, and Will Jr. knew exactly where it was and how to get there. Now he scanned up the main road until it curved around a bend and out of sight. He knew the diner was just another mile or so after that. Will Jr. stared at the silent radio for what seemed an eternity. Was the team still at Arby's after all this time? Or had they moved out weeks ago on schedule? Did they ever even make it there to begin with? Did their radios still work? Would they reach out this far? As Will Jr. began to consider everything that could possibly go wrong, as his mind was being flooded with every possible scenario, he picked the radio up and put it back down several times. He wanted to key the mic and call out in distress so badly he could taste it. But each time he did, he remembered his father's strict warnings about adhering to the radio protocols that he had set in place. Each time he picked up the radio, he remembered his dad harshly admonishing him as he paced back and forth behind him, during their training sessions. You key that handset, you better be ready to move out. Have a plan. Know where you are, where you're going. How far away is the team? How far are you from the rally point? Have a plan before you key that handset. How long till dark? Where are the people in town? What can you see? What can't you see? Have a plan. What route will you take? Have a plan. Have a plan. Will Jr. kept hearing his dad's warnings over and over, like an endless loop repeating in his head. He remembered the time they spent training and how redundant and unnecessary he thought it was at the time. But now, here, as the tension and anticipation grew more intense by the minute, he remembered it all so vividly. He finally fully understood. He set the radio down again and picked the binoculars back up. He scanned the town below again very carefully. It seemed deserted. He knew that the diner was 17 miles from Arby's cabin. He examined the terrain down to the road and estimated it to be 3 miles. He figured another mile or two to the diner from the road. He considered the pace Lindsay had been keeping and estimated the time it would take them to get there. He knew he could get there before the team did, which suited him. He knew the tactical advantage to arriving first, in case the team had been compromised. He knew they would never lead anyone to him, willingly or recklessly. Still, he had to consider everything. He looked at his watch, and then at his sister asleep beside him. He would let her sleep for a few hours, and then try to get a couple hours sleep himself. He looked at his watch again. He decided to make the radio call at 1500 hours. If he left right afterwards, he could be to the diner and be in place by dark. Then they would just have to wait. He looked at the radio again. Would there even be anyone to answer when he did call, he wondered. Then he put those thoughts out of his head. They were not productive, and they took his focus away from where it needed to be. Back in Queens, Renfro Carver was getting reacquainted with his mother and met his 2 nephews for the first time, along with Grace Falk, Winston's girlfriend, and the daughter of Security Chief Kevin Falk, a detail that Renfro was not made aware of. Miss May made sugar and molasses cookies, a rare treat reserved for very special occasions. And after they ate them, Renfro reached in his coat pocket and retrieved a big Cuban cigar. When he went to light it, Miss May swatted at his hand. "I don't give no matter how long you been gone, son. Ain't no way you're lighting that thing up in my house." He looked up at her and smiled. "Yes, of course, Mama. Sorry." He slid his chair back and walked out onto the porch, where he lit the cigar. He looked around the neighborhood. He remembered the building next door, which used to be home to a produce distributor, as he recalled. When he was young, he and his friends would climb up on the roof and smoke and drink beer on hot summer nights. He walked around back and jumped up onto the basement entranceway roof and pulled himself up to a window ledge, and from there onto the roof. It overlooked the street, and it gave him a good vantage point of the whole neighborhood. He found an old 5-gallon metal pail that once contained roofing tar. He carried it over near the edge and flipped it over. He sat down on it and continued to smoke his cigar as he watched the street below and the neighborhood beyond. He casually took out a small notebook from his vest pocket and began to take notes of the happenings in the neighborhood. He looked over across the street to Tony DeMarco's building. He noticed the blinds flutter when his gaze reached them, but didn't think much of it. He quickly went back to his surveillance. He took careful and precise notes. He focused mainly on the movements of the security team. He gave each man he saw a nickname based on some physical trait or characteristic. For example, one man he named Hook because he had a mustache and goatee that resembled the character Captain Hook. Another man he named Ginger because of his fair reddish complexion. He was also careful to make a mark by each name that belonged to someone he recognized as being ex-military. He chuckled almost to himself as he thought how predictable they were in their movements and mannerisms, that with all their emphasis on OPSEC and tactical this and tactical that they could unknowingly show that particular card so sweepingly universally. Renfro could spot a military man or woman a mile away. Now, he had been trained to do so effectively by our government, but he still marveled at how obvious it always was. Like lemmings marching to the sea, he thought, as he chuckled again. Strip a man down to nothing and gut him of any notion of independent thought. Then build him back up to be identical in every way to those around him. How then could he not be recognized as one of them? In special forces, the operators were taught the art of becoming the gray man, that is, to adapt themselves, to blend in seamlessly to their surroundings. They were trained to not stick out in a crowd in any way. Yes, Renfro thought to himself, he could even recognize them a mile away. He chuckled again. It's going to be so easy. It almost takes all the fun out of it, he said to himself. He took the last pull on his cigar and cast it away. He got up and walked to the rear where he had climbed up to the roof. He carefully glanced over the edge from behind an exhaust duct. He shook his head. Yep, both still there. He thought of several ways he could easily shake the men assigned to follow him, but then thought better of it. Not yet, he murmured. Play the game. He climbed back down the way he came up. At 1500 hours, Will Jr.'s alarm vibrated on his wristwatch. He woke and looked over to see his sister watching the town below in the binoculars. Any movement? He asked as he grabbed for the radio. No, she replied. It's been quiet. Almost like it's deserted. Will Jr. made sure everything was packed and ready to go before he keyed the handset. CQ, CQ, Patriot Nation. Can I get a copy and verification out there? He waited, but no response came. Say again, CQ, CQ, Patriot Nation. Looking for a verification. Copy? Will felt his anticipation and anxiety swell up from his stomach into his throat. He felt sick, almost nauseous. His worst fear being realized in real time. He looked over at his sister again. She had her backpack on and was waiting for him to give the order to move out. What would they do now? He considered their options as the dreaded unfolded into reality. Their only viable option would be to hike out to Arby's cabin. Will Jr. wondered what they would find when they arrived there. He tried the radio for the third time. CQ, CQ, Patriot Nation. Looking for a verification. Copy, please. Anyone out there? Pete and Johnny were manning the overwatch position on the ridge above Arby's cabin. Pete was outside smoking when he heard the third call from Will Jr., crushed out his cigarette and rushed into the radio hut, where he found Johnny asleep in the chair, head slumped in his arms on the small table opposite the radio. Pete kicked the chair, waking him, and exclaimed, "Man, wake up! That's our boy calling in." Pete leaned forward and keyed the D104 power mic. "Patriot Nation, we copy. Verification code is Delta 9637. Say again, Delta 9637. Will Jr.'s heart raced with excitement and relief. He keyed his handset. "Copy that, Patriot Base. We are proceeding to Rally Point Alpha. Can you arrange pickup?" "Roger that, Patriot 2. We'll be en route directly. Please advise of any medical or other immediate emergency needs at this time." The response came back. "Immediate emergencies negative. We'll be standing by at Rally Point upon team's arrival." Pete keyed the mic again. "Roger that, Patriot 2. Patriot Base on standby. Will continue to monitor channel during radio silence." Will Jr. put the radio in its holster on his pack and smiled at his sister. "Let's head down, Linz. Follow me, slow and careful all the way." Lindsay returned the smile and nodded in agreement. While Pete was talking to Will Jr., Johnny had been on a separate radio relaying the info back to the cabin, where Bart had called the rest of the group into the radio room to listen firsthand. No sooner had Will Jr. and Pete signed off when Bryce and Bear grabbed their packs and rifles and headed out the door for the diner. As they headed up the gravel road toward town, Bryce asked his wife, "Did you hear Pete in the background during Johnny's call-in?" It was Junior's voice on the radio with him. Bear smiled. "Yes, it was so good to hear his voice. I was really getting worried. With us scheduled to pull out day after tomorrow, it's cutting it close." Bryce sighed. "Yeah, but why wasn't Will the one to call in? Why Junior?" Bear shrugged. "What difference does it make who made the call? Why, do you think something's wrong?" "Don't know, honey. It just doesn't fit, that's all. Let's DT it. I want to get there ASAP." "I'm with you, big man," Bear replied. The pair set in to a slow jog.